The dark truth about Christopher Columbus. Ever wondered what history didn't tell you about Christopher Columbus? Our understanding of Columbus often comes from sanitized stories that omit darker aspects of his legacy. By delving into lesser-known facts, we can uncover a more nuanced and truthful picture of the man who is often misrepresented as a hero. The real story of Christopher Columbus is far more complex than what many textbooks reveal. Born in Genoa, Italy, Columbus was driven by a desire for adventure and wealth. His early life was marked by a fascination with exploration, setting the stage for the monumental voyages that would define his legacy. His 1492 voyage across the Atlantic is celebrated for its groundbreaking nature. Columbus set sail with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, hoping to find a new route to Asia. Instead, he stumbled upon lands previously unknown to Europeans, forever altering the course of history. Upon reaching the New World, Columbus encountered indigenous peoples, initiating a series of interactions that would have devastating consequences. While initially greeted with curiosity and hospitality, these early encounters quickly turned exploitative. Columbus's arrival marked the beginning of a tragic era for the native populations. Contrary to popular belief, Columbus did not discover America. Indigenous cultures had flourished there for thousands of years before his arrival. Furthermore, Norse explorers like Leif Erikson had reached North America centuries earlier. These misconceptions highlight the importance of revisiting and correcting historical narratives. Columbus's arrival in the New World marked the beginning of a complex and often tragic chapter in history. His initial encounters with indigenous peoples were characterized by curiosity and cautious interaction. However, these interactions quickly soured as Columbus's ambitions and the Spanish crown's expectations clashed with indigenous ways of life. The Spanish crown played a pivotal role in Columbus's expeditions, driven by the desire for new trade routes and wealth. Spain's imperial backing provided Columbus with the ships and crew necessary for his voyages. However, this support came with high expectations for wealth and resources, pressuring Columbus to deliver. Columbus's promises to the Spanish crown were often inflated and misleading. He exaggerated the riches and potential of the New World, hoping to secure continued support for his expeditions. These false promises created unrealistic expectations and fostered a climate of exploitation and greed among his men. One of the most tragic aspects of Columbus's legacy is the brutal enslavement of native populations. Columbus and his men forcibly captured and enslaved thousands of indigenous people, subjecting them to unimaginable hardships. This dark chapter highlights the devastating impact of European colonization on the native populations of the Americas. Indigenous people were subjected to grueling labor conditions under Columbus's rule. Forced to mine gold and cultivate crops, they endured backbreaking work with little rest. Many succumbed to the harsh conditions, leading to a significant decline in the native population. The exploitation was systematic and unrelenting, driven by Columbus's insatiable greed. Violence was a constant presence in the lives of the indigenous people under Columbus. His men used brutal tactics to subdue and control the native populations. Massacres, mutilations, and other forms of physical abuse were common. This reign of terror instilled fear and submission, further solidifying Columbus's oppressive governance. Disturbing accounts of sexual exploitation highlight another dark aspect of Columbus's expeditions. Indigenous women and girls were often taken as slaves and subjected to sexual violence by Columbus's men. These heinous acts were part of a broader pattern of dehumanization and exploitation that characterized Columbus's interactions with the native populations. Columbus ruled the New World with an iron fist. His governance was marked by tyranny, with draconian laws and harsh punishments for dissent. He imposed severe restrictions on the indigenous people, stripping them of their autonomy and freedom. This oppressive regime led to widespread suffering and resentment among the native inhabitants. As Columbus's rule became increasingly unbearable, uprisings and rebellions erupted. Indigenous communities banded together to resist the oppressive conditions imposed by Columbus. Though often brutally suppressed, These acts of defiance highlighted the growing unrest and discontent among the native populations, signaling their enduring spirit and desire for freedom. Rebellions against Columbus's rule were inevitable. Indigenous populations, driven to desperation by enslavement and violence, began to resist. These uprisings were met with brutal force, further exacerbating the already dire conditions. Columbus's inability to quell discontent among the native people highlighted his failure as a leader and administrator. The arrival of Europeans under Columbus introduced devastating diseases to the New World. Lacking immunity, indigenous populations were decimated by epidemics of smallpox, measles, and influenza. These diseases spread rapidly, causing a catastrophic decline in native populations and leaving entire communities desolate, fundamentally altering the demographic landscape of the Americas. Columbus's expeditions led to the systematic erosion of indigenous cultures. Traditional practices, languages, and knowledge were suppressed or lost. European cultural imposition, coupled with forced conversions to Christianity, sought to erase the rich diversity of native customs. This cultural destruction left a lasting scar on the heritage of the indigenous peoples. Columbus's fixation on finding gold drove much of his brutality. He imposed severe quotas on native populations, forcing them into grueling labor to extract precious metals. Those who failed to meet these demands faced horrific punishments. This relentless pursuit of wealth caused immense suffering and contributed to the exploitation of the New World. Christopher Columbus's arrest marked a significant turning point as he faced numerous accusations of tyranny and mismanagement. He was sent back to Spain in chains, an ignominious end to his governorship. This event exposed the dark side of his rule, casting a shadow over his earlier accomplishments and heroics. Upon returning to Spain, Columbus's reputation took a severe hit. Once celebrated as a pioneering explorer, he now faced widespread criticism and disdain. His brutal tactics and misdeeds in the New World were no longer overlooked, leading to a tarnished legacy that contradicted the mythologized version of his exploits. Historical accounts of Columbus's life vary widely, reflecting different perspectives and biases. Some portray him as a visionary navigator, while others emphasize his role in the suffering and exploitation of indigenous peoples. These conflicting narratives have fueled ongoing debates about his true character and the consequences of his actions. Modern interpretations of Columbus have shifted, with increasing scrutiny over his violent and oppressive methods. Scholars and activists have worked to present a more balanced view, acknowledging his navigational achievements while highlighting the atrocities he committed. This reevaluation aims to provide a more accurate and comprehensive understanding of his impact. The celebration of Columbus Day has become a contentious issue, sparking debates about its appropriateness. Critics argue that honoring Columbus glorifies a history of violence and colonization, while proponents claim it recognizes his contributions to exploration. This controversy has led many to question whether the holiday should be redefined or replaced. The movement to remove Columbus statues has gained momentum, reflecting a broader reassessment of historical figures. Activists argue that these monuments glorify a man responsible for atrocities against indigenous peoples. Cities and institutions are increasingly responding by taking down statues, sparking debates about how history should be remembered and honored. Voices of indigenous communities have become crucial in shaping the narrative around Columbus. These perspectives highlight the long-lasting impacts of colonization, including cultural erasure and systemic oppression. Indigenous leaders advocate for a more accurate portrayal of history, emphasizing the need to honor their ancestors and celebrate their resilience and contributions. Calls to reform the way Columbus is taught in schools are growing louder. Educators and activists push for curricula that present a balanced view of his expeditions, including the violent and exploitative aspects. By incorporating indigenous perspectives and primary sources, schools can provide students with a more comprehensive understanding of history. Examining primary sources about Columbus's expeditions reveals a stark contrast to traditional narratives. Journals, letters, and reports from the time expose the brutality and deception that accompanied his voyages. These documents offer invaluable insights, helping to paint a fuller picture of Columbus and challenge the myths that have long surrounded his legacy. The role of revisionist history in reshaping Columbus's story is significant. Scholars and historians are reevaluating historical accounts, questioning long-held beliefs, and uncovering suppressed truths. This ongoing process aims to correct historical inaccuracies, ensuring that future generations have a more truthful and nuanced understanding of Columbus and his impact on the world. Christopher Columbus often stands in stark contrast when compared to other explorers of his time. While figures like Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan are hailed for their navigational prowess and relatively peaceful interactions, Columbus's expeditions are marred by violence and exploitation. This comparison highlights the darker aspects of his legacy. Columbus's voyages had far-reaching global consequences, triggering a wave of European colonization that reshaped entire continents. The introduction of European diseases decimated indigenous populations, while the transatlantic slave trade began to take root. These events set the stage for centuries of exploitation and cultural erasure, profoundly altering world history. Reflecting on Columbus's actions offers lessons on ethical exploration and colonization practices. Modern perspectives emphasize the importance of respecting indigenous cultures and prioritizing humanitarian considerations in any exploration or expansion efforts. These lessons are crucial for fostering a more just and equitable global society. Today, Columbus's impact is a subject of widespread reflection and debate. His voyages are credited with opening the Americas to European influence, but at a tremendous cost to native populations. This duality prompts ongoing discussions about how his legacy should be remembered and taught in contemporary society. Public opinion on Columbus has shifted significantly in recent years. Once universally celebrated as a heroic explorer, he is now viewed more critically, especially in light of his brutal treatment of indigenous peoples. This evolving perspective fuels debates on how to appropriately commemorate his contributions while acknowledging his atrocities. Activist movements across the globe are increasingly vocal against the glorification of Christopher Columbus. These movements seek to highlight the atrocities committed during his expeditions, advocating for a more honest portrayal of history. By raising awareness, they aim to honor the experiences and perspectives of indigenous peoples affected by his actions. In response to these movements, many communities are shifting their focus from Columbus Day to celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. This alternative celebration acknowledges the rich cultures, histories, and contributions of indigenous communities. It serves as a step towards healing and recognition, fostering a more inclusive and accurate historical narrative. Reevaluating Columbus's place in history involves critically examining his actions and their consequences. By doing so, we can challenge outdated narratives and promote a more nuanced understanding. This reevaluation is essential for fostering a society that values truth and justice, ensuring that history reflects diverse perspectives and experiences. Summarizing the real story of Christopher Columbus reveals a complex and often troubling legacy. His voyages had profound and lasting impacts, not all of them positive. By acknowledging both his achievements and his atrocities, we can foster a more balanced and informed perspective, paving the way for more ethical historical discourse. Encouraging viewers to research and share the true history of Columbus is crucial for spreading awareness. By educating ourselves and others, we can contribute to a more accurate and just historical record. This call to action empowers individuals to challenge myths and advocate for a more inclusive understanding of our past.